Hey everyone, I wanted to create a quick Unity walkthrough and building out a animated text pop-up and how you would do that inside your Unity scene. If I click play, this is a pretty empty Unity scene. It's just got my character that I'm moving around. It's got a box and it has a ground plane. That's about that has in it. It has an enemy from another tutorial too. You can just go ahead and get rid of that. Okay. So what I'm going to do here, the first thing I need to do is make my canvas. If you're making pop-ups, you'll need to make one change to how we usually make our canvas, and that's that you'll need to change the screen space to camera. So render mode screen space camera. I'm going to grab my main camera and drag it over here to render camera. So I grab my main camera and drag it over. And what that will do is snap your canvas to the bounds of your camera. After I do that, I change it to world space. And that way my text boxes stay where they're supposed to in the world and they don't change if I move the camera. Alright, with that set up, I can start building out my text box. So I'm going to hit plus, UI, then I'm going to say panel. From here, I'm just going to scale my panel down until I get about the right size that I want. Okay, and I have this thing just kind of move it around. Something like that. That's about the size panel I want. And now I'm going to go in and add a text mesh UI, text mesh pro UI. So UI, text mesh pro. And I'm going to put that right underneath the panel. So I have canvas with the panel under it with the text mesh pro under it. And then I'm just going to scale it to be right within the bounds of this panel. And you can set your text to whatever you want. You know, like, oops. Here's some example text. Put whatever you want here. Okay. I'm going to toggle off my gizmos. Those are the things that are popping up over top of it so I can see what I'm doing. There we go. Alright, so I have my panel here. And then what I'm going to want to do is actually animate, put some animations on it. So if I select my panel itself, not the text box, but the panel, and then come over to Window, Animation, Animation, it's going to give me the option to create an animator and an animation clip, and that's what I want to do. So click create, and then we're going to call this, and then go ahead and set your folder to animation folders. If you don't have an animation folder, just make one, put it in your assets. But I'm going to call this scale and animation. Okay. Now here's where we want to go ahead and create the animation for the scene. I'm going to go ahead and drag my animation window right down here so you can kind of see what I'm working on while I do it. And the first thing I want to do is turn on, well, let's actually, before we do that, let's go ahead and add a property down here. And I want to add it on the rect transform. And I have the option for scale. So go down here to rect transform, scale, and click plus. And then it will add it in the scene. So by default, there's already an animation on here, or a keyframe on here, which just keeps it at the scale it's supposed to be. What I want to do is take this one at the end, or sorry, this one at the beginning, and I want to scale this down to 0 in one of the axes. So if I want it to pop open like this, scale it like this, I'm going to set this to 0. If I close that, it actually disappears. Oops, sorry. Here, don't set it in your Unity editor, set it down here underneath the panel scale. So I'm scaling the X. So I'm going to say scale X is 0, like that. And now, what happens, you see if it comes in like this, if I hit play to check it, you see I get a box that pops in. Right now it's pretty slow, so I'm going to grab this, make it like twice as fast, drag it down here, and then we'll see how that looks. That's a lot better. The second thing I want to do is I don't like how stretched my text is coming in. So what I want to do is kind of fade my text in, maybe starting from about this point. So what I want to do here is add a property. And I believe this is under text TMP, Text Mesh Pro UI, font color. I think this is what we need. Okay. And just to test it, we have this font color RGB, and then we have one for A. A stands for alpha, which controls the transparency of what our text looks like. So if I put this to 0, oops, let's do it on the right keyframe. You can see it starts fading in. The only issue is we want to do it like much later. So I'm going to put it maybe starting about here. And then it's still set to 0, so I can click this button here to add a key. Now what I do when I click off, it's still going to try to blend between that, but I can change this one back to 0. And now we don't have anything until the very end. So the panel comes in first and then goes. And then I might drag, oops, I might drag all these keyframes down a little bit. So it fades in a little slower. Even a little bit slower. Something like that, maybe. Okay. And with that, I have my animation on my box coming from here. Okay. So at this point, I also need something in my Unity scene. Basically, so at this point I'm done with animating. So now I just need to go back to my Unity scene and make a script. So I'm going to go into my scripts. I'm going to go to UI scripts here, just so I can keep my script separate from everything else. I'm going to create a new script. So right click, create mono behavior script. And you can call this one something like panel animation. And then, so I'm going to use this to set up my animation and play it back once I get into my script. But the second thing I need to do is set some kind of trigger zone. We're not previewing it at the moment, so we're seeing it as large. We'll control that in a sec. Next thing I want to do is add a box, or some kind of collider, so I can create an empty component. I'm going to turn gizmos on so I can see where it is. And I have this empty game object. I'm going to rename it and call it something like panel pop-up trigger. I'm going to add a component to it. I'm going to add a box collider 2D. I'll just move it wherever in my scene I want there to be the box collider, and then I can scale up this so it has the overlap size I want, so maybe a 2 by 2. You can say, okay, so when I get here in my scene, turn the panel on. Okay. So now that we have this, we're pretty much ready to start making our script. Oh, last thing, make sure that when you go to the Box Collider 2D, you check this and say it's is trigger, because we're going to use a trigger for this. All right, now we can start writing our animation script. Well, sorry, before we do that, one more thing we need to do. Go to Window, Animation, Animator. Make sure that you have your panel selected, so you can see the scale in value on here. And the first thing you want to do is right click, create state, empty, new state. And you want to make a transition. And you want to right click after you make this blank one and say set as layer default state. Oops. I'm going to get rid of this transition actually. Delete. It just says make set as layer default state. There. Now we just have the one going. We don't need multiple transitions. Okay. And then from any state, right click, make transition. We can say scale in. And that should be good for ours, I believe. If not, we'll go back and make changes. First thing we want to do is we want to come to scale in. And we have the option for loop time. Go ahead and make sure that's checked off, because we don't want to loop the animation. We just want to play it once to scale it in. And then lastly, we're going to make a Boolean. So come over here to parameters on the side and click plus bool, and you can call this something like panel overlap. And then on the transition from any state to scale in, we're going to hit a plus, and we're going to say panel overlap is true, which is set to. Okay. Now I think we're ready to start writing our script. So we go back to your scene, go back to your scripts. Remember we have this panel animation script we've been working on. Go ahead and open that up. Okay, here we go. I'm going to wait for it to finish loading. So the first thing that we need is we need to call our animation variable. So we'll say private animation real fast. Let me check this real fast. Make sure on our panel. Yeah, okay, cool. We're good. So come down to start, and we're going to say private animation, and we'll say pop in. And then down in void start, we're going to say something like pop in equals, oh wait, hold on. Is it animate more? I don't think so. Hold on. Oops, yeah, it is. Okay. Private animator, animator, and then we're going to say pop in equals get component. Pop in equals get component animator. So like that. So basically what we're doing here is we're calling the component and we're saying, hey, when this thing happens, as when we start our script, go ahead and get this animator component. So that's what it should look like. And here, we can set pop in, oops, sorry, bool, and then we're saying pop in set boolean, and then we're going back to our animator, and that boolean we're using is panel overlap that we wrote right here. So we can come back, let's say, make sure it's got to be exactly right. Okay, panel overlap like this, and then we're going to set it to true. Okay. So this should handle getting our animation to play on here, but there's a couple things we want to do. The first is that we want to set the game object this is on, the panel, to not active. So we'll say this dot game object dot set active false in the start. So this basically hides it when we start it. And then on the pop in above it, we want to set this to true. This dot game object dot set active, we'll say true. So basically hide it on start, so we don't have to worry about hiding it ourselves. And then it will show it when something happens in our update that we're going to take care of. Okay, so the second thing here is that, well, actually, to make this easier, so let me go back to my scene. So before I put this panel pop-up trigger in an empty game object, I can just put it on the panel and it will make our lives easier. So go ahead and delete this game object, go to the panel itself, and then go down to add component and say box collider 2D. So by default, this is going to assign it on this, which we don't want, but we can move it. So if you come down here to edit collider, you go and offset it on the Y. Oop, make sure I can see it. Oh, it's really small. I guess because it's animated the same as the rest. This one has 1 by 1. 0. No, I guess there is a reason I did it this way. Alright, don't put it on the box collider itself. Just keep it on your empty game object. But what this means is that we'll need another script. Because basically, if you're getting collision, the script for that needs to be on the component that you put the script on. So we need to talk between these two scripts and tell it, hey, when I trigger here, play the animation over here. So we're going to make one more script. So on this box collider that we have down here, go ahead and add a component. What we're going to add is we're going to make a new script called trigger check script, something like that. And then create that. Okay. So wait for this to upload. Give it a sec. Okay. And then you can double click on your trigger check script you just made to open it. Okay. So here what we want to say is two things. Take out this line at the top. The first one is that we have our panel animation script. We're going to need to go to that and tell it that we are overlapping. So we're going to say public panel animation. And I'm just going to call it panel animation. This is referencing our script and saying, hey, we're going to go in the script and do something. And then we need a void on trigger. Nope. Auto completed on me. Void on trigger enter. try this one more time. Void on trigger enter 2D. There we go. So it should look like this. Private void on trigger enter 2D collider 2D collision. We're going to call this other. And we're going to say if other dot game object dot compare tag player and then from here we need to talk to the script and tell it something. So to do that, we're actually going to jump to our panel animation script and we're going to set up a boolean. We're going to say public bool player overlap. And then make sure you save it. And what that's going to do is it's going to let us talk to that script and set the bool on here. So we can say panel animation dot player overlap equals true. And then on here, we're going to basically come down below and say private void on trigger exit 2D. I'm going to say other if other dot game object dot compare tag player. About the same thing. Panel animation overlap equals false. Okay, so just like that. So when we go over the trigger, it should be set to true. When we go under the trigger, it's set to false. Now, what we got to do here is we need to set up an if statement to basically control this. So say in the void update, if player overlap, and then I'm going to move this inside my if statement. So Control X to cut, Control V to paste. So if player overlap, and then we can just say else. Oops. Shouldn't do parentheses, just brackets. This game object set active false. Like this. Okay. So let's go take a look and see how this is looking. We have some things that we're going to need to connect. All right, so I'm going to go back to my Unity scene. The first thing that I need to do is I need to drop my actual panel script on top of the panel. So I'm going to go to Scripts, UI Scripts, Panel Animation, and I'm going to left click and drag it onto the panel. And it is right here. The next thing I need to do is go to my pop-up trigger, the empty box collider. It has the script on it already, but I need to drag my panel over here so that it knows and can talk to it. Alright, so now let's, without too much testing, let's play and see what we get. So nothing's here. Walk forward, and it's not popping up. So we'll need to check that out. Okay, I think I've realized what's wrong with this script. So basically, the problem is that I'm setting active the panel on the panel script. This won't work because anytime I'm trying to set something, run something off of a script that is not active, it won't run at all. So I can't call the script because to turn it back on, at least from there, because it is on the object that is off, if that makes any sense. So what I need to do is rewrite my scripts. So really all I want this animation to do is just play the animation. So what I'm going to do is take off all of these, set active falses, take that one out, oop, not that one, take this one out to set it true, and then take this whole line out right here. also going to take out this public game object panel option here. So let's save. This should be all I'm left with. Private animator pop in, public bool player overlap, void start, get component animator, and then play the animation. Where I want to set active is actually on my box height test. Oops, sorry. On the trigger check script. So what I want to do here is I do want to turn this to true and false, but I also want to enable it here. So we'll say, so first I need a game object. So we'll say public game object panel. And then we'll say if other game object can protect player, and then we'll say panel dot game object dot set active true. And we'll copy this on the code, and then when we exit, we want to turn the panel back off, so we will set the panel to false. And the reason this will work inside of here is because this little trigger box is always active in our scene. We are never turning it on or off. So we do have one more thing we need to do though, which is after we save, we need to come here to the panel pop-up trigger and see we have to reference the panel that we're hiding right here. So we're going to grab our panel and drag it down. Now let's check and see if our code works. Okay. Okay, cool. So a few things. One is we do want our panel to be hidden from the start, so it can pop in later. Secondly, looks like there's an issue with the animator, so let's correct those. First things first. On the trigger check script in the start, I'm going to say panel.gameObject set active false, just so that we don't have to hide it when we come in. So if we check this, we'll go back, hit play. Yep. Now we need to change some settings in the animator so it actually plays through completely. So let's go over to the animator window. We can make changes in the animator actually while the game is running. It's not a big deal. So we'll come in here. I'm going to click on my transition, settings. I'm going to uncheck can transition to self. Let's see. There we go. All right. So show this real fast. Hit play in my scene. Come on. The text pops up. And then when I leave, it goes away. So there we go. That's how to set up an animated text box that pops up on a trigger in your scene inside of Unity. If you wanted to put like an exit animation, you could do the same thing on here, but then just say on trigger exit, play animation, and then you could have another animation where it fades out. Alright, thank you all.